so we're ready to start. So welcome to you to Yield Enrollment and Retention Tips presented by Mongoose. I'm Greg Bauch. I'm the Content Production Manager here at Mongoose. With me as always is Mike Kochczynski.
Yes. Client Success Lead, Partner Manager. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. So what a broad topic. We're just going to be able to give you all the tips you need for all three of these things right off the bat. Probably not. But the way you can do that is to make sure that you are represented in the conversation. So many of these schools are different. All of our schools in attendance are different. So make sure that you're represented by making sure if you have a question, you need more color on that conversation, make sure you ask that question. That is open to you at all points in time. We want to encourage you to do that. Our hope is that throughout this presentation, you have some tips about making your school more attractive, about making your students happier and more engaged, and making your processes easier to follow for your students to get through that funnel. And that is our goal. So as much as we can cover in the time of this webinar, we are going to do. Mike, I want to start with yield.
Yeah.
So, and that can mean a lot of different things. So I know you were looking a little bit into the research of algorithms.
Yes.
So why don't we start with that?
Well, we could spend an hour just on algorithms and vendors and opportunities that are out there. But essentially, the statistical models we've used are in flux. Obviously, some of that was impacted by the NACAC ruling in 2019, but there's like this bigger world event called COVID that really threw off our models. So the models we have are really in flux. So a couple things I would say, algorithms in general are very good at determining a student's likelihood to enroll, their willingness to pay a certain amount. They are far less accurate at predicting persistence to graduation retention. So be very careful when you're setting up your algorithms to think about those components. Another part of using a tool like an algorithm too is oftentimes there are hidden biases. So I would encourage everyone who is using an algorithm or any type of modeling platform to perform a bias audit frequently. And then I would also compare the merit evaluations that the algorithm spits out to you to a human evaluation as well, and see if there's any deficiencies in those decisions as well.
One of the things we wanted to talk about was making your school more attractive to potential students, prospective students. And your website is such a big part of that. Maybe more important than your campus this day and age, but certainly on par with with your campus in terms of attracting students to your school. So some things with websites, first off, according to RNL's e-expectations report and the latest one they did, 57% of students will find your school through your website. They're usually not just typing in mongooseuniversity.com, depending on what your school is. They're getting to your school's website through a search engine, and they're probably searching through their programs. So one of the things we like to talk about is your program pages, making sure that they're findable. Do an audit of your school, search for programs in your area, make sure your school comes up. And that involves kind of being not creative, but making sure that you're even calling your programs the right things to making sure that they're findable to prospective students. Does your school show up in Google? How does it show up? Those things are very important. There are lots of tools that you can get into with your school as well, through your website as well.
Absolutely. I wouldn't be afraid of calling out any signature programs too under particular colleges and or academic areas. Don't be afraid to highlight any particular faculty. There's an institution I saw put a YouTube, basically of a lecture that that institution had this fairly renowned faculty member. I was like directly on their webpage. That was very clever, good usage, because parents are going to look for those sorts of things. Students probably less so, but it's a great idea to highlight your faculty and staff, and feel free to bring them into the process. In fact, speaking of which, don't be afraid. I know we're sort of pivoting a little out of the website when I say this, but
I'll get back into the website after you make this point.
Don't be afraid to offer Zoom or team meetings or any type of video one-to-one with faculty, especially if they're willing to come on board and help you with that. Same thing with alumni. I'm a big believer that any student who applies to an institution should be able to meet with an alumnus or an alumna of a particular program, or maybe from the same hometown, et cetera, if you can make that work. Once a student is accepted, I would love to see schools starting to offer those opportunities with faculty. Some faculty might be on board with that, some might not, but the ones that are willing to help, certainly bring them into those processes as much as you possibly can.
I'm so glad I grabbed a segue to get back into it, because video is powerful for that. So it's a good communicative tool for acceptance as well. You know, if a faculty can't meet with each student, they can create a message, personalized or not, to send to that student too. video can be more powerful than something as an email, or you can send a video in an email to communicate with students. You mentioned highlighting like faculty that might be of note to the community. Even if someone in your community doesn't know who a faculty member is, your school knows who the rock star faculty members are, and putting video of their classes up can really highlight them, let a student know what it's like to be a part of that program as well. So video is so powerful, in the more a student knows about what they're getting into at your school, the more comfortable they would be on that. Would you agree with that?
I would, and I noticed a lot of institutions do a great job, particularly on TikTok, to a lesser extent YouTube, sometimes Instagram, where you see videos of current students and they're going through their day as a student athlete, or they're showing their experience at a co-op program or an internship, et cetera. But following around a faculty member and saying like, hey, here's like the students they met with, and like, this is what their day's like, and this is some of the research they do, and these are the sections they taught that particular day, would be a really neat idea. And I think putting that on Facebook or channels, particularly where parents would see them, is something you should consider doing.
Yeah, so you can't just watch a webinar and we can bring up all of these tools. So many people watching, you might not be responsible for being able to allocate resources from your budget. You can't just go out and go to Best Buy and get the tool that's going to fix your retention, of course. You can use the tools you have to your advantage. And video is a big part of that. You have it in your pocket. It is amazing to me that it's so hard to communicate with students when they carry around a supercomputer for the express written, reason for communicating with people, but that tool is super important. You can also use your students in your videos.
Absolutely.
If you create these videos with, and you happen to have some kind of course in your college where students can, make projects based on making your school look better, utilize your students, put them in the video, because there's no better person to speak to students and someone that they can relate to than featuring your own students.
Absolutely. And I know that today's webinar is really about enrollment, but the same content could be reused if you're a marketing and communications person in advancements, in retention and other areas too for the institution. Getting back to your point about phones too,
Yeah.
RNL released a study, actually I think this is part of e-expectations. A student unlocks their phone an average of 79 times per day. So just think about all the times somebody is looking at their device, opening it, and all those opportunities to engage with somebody are there.
Yeah. Some video tips, just real quick. I know this isn't the crux of the conversation, but I always like to say these things. Make sure that the videos you're creating are adaptable to mobile. That's a small detail, but it's super important because that is how most people are watching your videos. Many people will be watching your videos without sound. So if you can't subtitle the whole video, make sure the important highlights of your video have words on screen. And this is the most important thing with creating a video. Have a purpose for it. Tell people what you want to do with that video. Have a call to action in your video. It's great to highlight your campus. It's great to, discuss a process, but if there isn't a step after that, people aren't going to take action. So have a clear call to action at the end of your video, because you need to tell people what you want them to do. Update, create new videos as much as possible. I know you might be thinking, well, a student goes through a cycle, we can keep this video for a whole decade. It's very important for SEO purposes and for branding to update and change your videos as much as possible.
Absolutely. And keep them authentic. One of the 10 things you're going to hear consistently through the series is authenticity drives everything that we recommend doing. So, whether it's video, whether it's website, the information they're getting should be authentic. It should not be packaged. It should not be overproduced. The information people are getting, it should be accurate. And frankly, speaking of information, it should be really easy for people to get that. So we talked about academic programs, but things like tuition calculators should be very easy to get to on your website. And one of the things I would encourage you to do too is bring in a family member who maybe doesn't have as much experience with your institution, not a prospective student, not a prospective parent, but somebody who isn't going through the search and say, hey, if I pulled up mongoose.edu and said, find our tuition, how hard would it be for them to do that? If they wanted to find out some of the signature programs in our institution, how hard would it be to do that? If they wanted to find out about living on campus or off campus or the opportunities that your community offers outside of the institution, would that be easy to do or not?
That's kind of like surveying. When you want to say something about surveys, because that involves asking people who've gone through the experience, how was that experience? And I think that's pretty important. Surveys can be tricky to distribute. It can be tricky to get answers to surveys. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we obviously work for a company that has a texting platform. So I am not shy about saying, feel free to send those those surveys via text. One of the neat ideas that I've seen, Valparaiso University, I will just name them because they've used this idea. They will text all their first semester students, whether somebody transferred in or whether they enrolled and are a new first year student or a transfer. And they will text them, hey, how's your first week going, using a GIF or emoji. I think that's brilliant. You should do those sorts of things and see what your responses are going to be.
Surveys can be a great way to save time in allocating resources as well. And I know this is a step before that in the funnel, but when you're first trying to organize students who might be interested in your institution, a survey that just asks, how interested are you in our school? Yes, no, maybe. You can take all of those no's. If your texting platform is like Cadence and talks well with your information systems, you can use that data in future outreaches to narrow down your field and concentrate on the students who might be interested and who might have future questions. So yes, text, that's a super effective tool. We're not gonna lie about it. Texting is super important, but use it in conjunction with your other channels as well.
And if I may, I know we're in sort of yield season. I'm not a big believer that there is a specific yield season. I believe yield kind of happens throughout, but one of the neat things I've seen a lot of schools do, particularly clients that work with us, is they will send out a text right now, basically, to your point about the surveying and saying, are you still interested? And then they'll take those students that answer yes, and they will put them on different tracks, different workflows, different conflows, essentially. So they're engaging them with the right content, but they're not going to spend as much time with the students who say, yeah, you know what, I'm looking at this other institution instead, because why would you spend that time?
We want to get into questions because your specific institution will have different challenges than other institutions on here, and we will get into them in just a minute. So just in case you were late joining us, you will get a recording of this conversation just in case you got in a little late. Don't worry about that. That will be sent to your email inbox. If you have questions, please get in the chat. Jessica will be holding that forum in just a bit. So there will be questions. We want to make sure that we get to what we know will be a lot of questions. I wanted to jump back to authenticity because it is important. You mentioned transparency and making sure that cost calculators are easy to find. Everything on your website should be easy to find, but especially things like that. Also, authenticity, I'll try that again. Also, authenticity has to do with the way in which you speak about your school, your brand, and how people will feel about your school. How you speak about your school goes a long way to making sure that people are attracted to your school. The right people know what to expect when they go to your institution, while they're at your institution, to make sure that that they stay retained, that they stay engaged.
Right. When we do this series, we want people to take information they don't already know, and we want there to be very actionable steps. And so if you take anything away from this particular session, I would highly recommend looking into the research of Dr. Lisa Nunn. She has done a tremendous work in college belonging. In fact, that's the name of her book. So I'd encourage you to buy it or take it out from your library if you have it. But one of the things that she fights in her content pretty aggressively, I was trying to find the right word.
You did good, yeah.
Is this concept of like, go exploring, find yourself, find your tribe, find your group. And one of the things that she's found in her research is it can be very damaging to students, because what will end up happening is if a student doesn't achieve that very quickly, they might get discouraged. Some students aren't me, who are bubbly and want to meet everybody, the Ferris Bueller's on campus. Not everybody is that way. So sometimes you can set up your students to frankly have some frustrations on your campus when you have those types of taglines, when you create those senses on your website. So, be very authentic about what is the promise of this institution. When I graduate from this institution, when I attend classes here, what is the feeling I'm getting? What are the outcomes I'm getting from this experience?
That is a great point. You cannot choose your audience. Your school might have traditionally certain types of students that are interested in certain types of programs or activities, but you never know what your audience is unless you ask questions. I mean, even with this webinar, we don't expect to know what everyone's problems were and how to address them. That's why we like to make this a community discussion and invite people on to give their insight into it. So if you had certain advice in the chat, it doesn't have to be a question, just something working for you, we would encourage you to do that. But just knowing your audience is so important to how you go about your daily day. And the more questions you ask, the better you know your audience. That's pretty important. Authenticity. I mean, again, we can talk for an hour on authenticity as well. Mike, can I talk about community colleges a little bit?
Please.
All right. So I know a big portion of our audience is community colleges, and they are certainly facing some tough challenges right now. And just to address community colleges and what has to be frustrating for community colleges is that you could help students in the short term at a community college. And, you can have a program that's going to help someone turn their life around in a short amount of time, but there is a lot of competition for your services. It's hard. Enrollment is down at community colleges. So not only can you help a student in terms of education, but if you work for a community college, you can also help a student through their process with your own skill set. And I would recommend to anyone who works in administration in the community college, whenever you get a chance and you have a touch point with a student, and I know those can be rare at any institution, make yourself available to answer questions, because one of the big things with community college students is that they might not advocate for themselves as much as other students. They might have problems with a process at your school, and we know how difficult processes can be, that they might not raise their hand for. So at any interaction you have, be it a text or just a phone conversation or in-person meeting, make sure that you're asking them if they are having challenges with kind of the processes as they get through the funnel. That little question that you ask could prompt them to actually step forth and say, yes, I am having a problem just uploading this form. So give that opportunity as much as possible to help students through that difficult process of just making it in school. And I would love questions from community colleges or advice from community colleges in our chat as well. So it's open to all institutions. So just, I know that's a particular, conversation point these days. Do you want to get into questions?
We can do that. One of the things that, again, another takeaway from today, there's a quote I really like from George Bernard Shaw.
Okay.
I'm making sure I read it here. So the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has already taken place. So when you put out flyers, when you have resources on your website, make sure that you are verifying that the people see that they know it. When you're meeting with your students, I would say that most of the folks probably on today's webinar series and work with us, they got into this business because they like helping students and like helping people. So take those opportunities and make sure people really know what they're doing and not just assume that they're going to take this form from this office to meet with this person, but that they know very specifically to do that. To bring it up in chat too, by the way, I want to call it out. Todd brought up a really good point that enrollment is up at technical colleges. So that is good news.
And graduate colleges as well, I believe, are, if not even keel as to where they were before COVID, but that might be up a tick as well. So many different surveys come out every single day on these numbers that it's hard to keep track. Anything to add before we get into questions as I see them filing in? All right, once again, use the chat to ask questions. We'd love to answer them and continue this conversation. Jessica, I know you're still admitting some people, but are you available to give us some questions?
Yes, sir. We can start with a question that we had at the beginning when we were talking about video. We had Andy ask, how do you overcome a centralized university communications and marketing department who insists on having university videographers making and posting every video?
So that would be by university videographers, Andy, and you can just answer yes or no. I'll see this. Do you mean the students or staff? Do you have a guess on what that would be?
I would think it's a combination, but mostly led by staff.
I think
I read it as the university marketing department.
Right.
Okay, so how would you combat their insistence to do everything themselves? Well, it's tough because I think if you're spending a lot of money on video, I don't want to say that's a bad idea. Resources are resources, and that's a great thing. So I don't think anyone watching this webinar has a problem with too many resources. I do know that there are fixes to video problems that aren't expensive, but I don't know about that.
I would argue that while the production and the staffing of those productions is important, that it's very important that the two sides, marketing and enrollment, and by the way, we're seeing them blend more and more.
Yeah.
It's very important that you be on the same page for what is the call to action of this content item, or what is the main theme, the tenor we're going for, motif that we want in all of our content. And is this hyper segmented? So I believe Andy's from SUNY Binghamton. So if we're talking about Binghamton, are we talking about the faculty member who I think won a Nobel Prize recently? Do we want to highlight that? And is it all about this faculty member, or do we highlight all the big things that are kind of happening in the triple cities in the southern tier of New York? But making sure that everybody's on the same page on what that language is. I would also argue that, frankly, enrollment should have a place at the table in crafting those messages. Because you're hearing it from parents, you're hearing from students what moved the individuals to actually apply to your institution, to eventually enroll to your institution, visit your campus. So you're the first line. So you should have a place at the table answering those questions. So,
and it's tough because we talked in the beginning about how involved this conversation was. What you're asking us is really, how do you, it can be applied to almost any workplace in America. How do you advocate for yourself in your department when you're pushed up against another department trying to tell you how to do your job? So there's no real answer for that, like a blanket answer that's going to answer everyone's questions. But the more you can advocate for yourself, the more proof you have that what you need is important based on the needs of others, the more examples you have of how your input should be, considered, I think the better. Always lead with stats, and there's no gray area in terms of a conversation to be had. So does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay, hopefully it did. If anyone had something to add on that, I'd appreciate it. But like I said, excuse me 1 second, I have to sneeze. It went away. The lights are very bright in here, which is why it's very warm. So maybe we could add more to that throughout the conversation. So I don't want to say we're done with that, but we're on pause with that, and we're going to go to another question with Jessica.
So Mary had a question that I think rolls nicely from this topic into her question. So Mary has observed that some faculty and staff make too many assumptions that students know more than what they actually do about processes, about college navigation, and especially at community colleges. And then people get upset when students are asking questions from their lived experience. So how do you change that culture? I know that this is something we've been talking about a lot, how students don't know, and a lot of parents don't know really anything about the college application process, and there seems to be a knowledge gap. So how do you change that culture at your school?
My first answer to that would be a short sentence that is walk in their shoes. And the more you walk in a student's shoes, trying to get through that process, the better your staff will understand it. Someone that's been at your institution for years and years and years understands these processes, but they understand it from their perspective. Change that perspective to the perspective of a student, and that's the best way to explain to them like what they're going through and how it actually is difficult.
Yeah, I get very nervous when I work with institutions as a client success lead, and I hear a phrase similar to retention is everyone's job. It is. Everyone is responsible for retention and making sure there's a good student experience, but there should be one office that is always answering questions and always knows where people should go. And faculty should know to send students there, should know that they can go there to ask questions themselves. In fact, there might even be a committee that's housed under that office, and the folks on the academic side might be part of that equation. But it's very easy to assume that other people know what you know. So to Greg's point, absolutely walk in their shoes, ask very pointed questions. If this was my first time walking on this campus, how do I go from the student center to the weight room or to the library or this other place, and ask them how they would know that. How did they get around? Was there signage? Did they talk to people? Do you want staff that are kind of around to help people with questions, particularly on the first week of classes? So all those things are very easy minor fixes to really, I think, change the culture quickly.
Sure. So if it's a team effort, have a team leader, I guess is the answer to that. All right, Jess, how about another question? Keep them coming, by the way.
If I can add one more thing to that, we've been working a lot with Campus ESP. We have an upcoming event on parent engagement with them. RNL is coming out soon with the results from a high school student survey, and they have a parent survey. There is a lot of data backing up that parents and students just don't have any of this information, and that there's limited access to it, and that there is this knowledge gap. So if all else fails, there is data. And if you can't find it now, it'll be coming out via RNL very soon. There's data to back that up. So hopefully you can get more people on your team and share a little bit more knowledge and education.
That's a great point.
We had Jennifer asked if we could expand a little bit more on what we were talking about at the beginning as far as the algorithm and modeling platform. Just a little bit more about what that is, how it works.
I was going to ask the same thing. So Mike is super excited, and I do not know anything about algorithms. I have intellectual security enough to tell you that. So I will be listening to this as well.
So in short, there's a number of vendors out there, and then obviously you can build your own. But the thinking is we can take the data that we have of the current students population and the prospective student population, and we can build out these models for enrollment. So we know that if we historically enroll X number of students from this high school, if enrollment at that high school goes down a little, it might impact our number of accepted students, the number of students who applied, potentially our yield. So it's tools that do that at a very, very advanced level. I am completely oversimplifying it there. One thing I would say with any algorithm you're using, numbers are numbers, but sometimes there are hidden biases underneath them. So when you do have these models, you might see, well, we have all these students locally. Well, why is that? Is it the appeal of the institution? Is it some type of signature program we have that is appealing to this particular region?
Or is it because you're only speaking to local students? So that's those,
exactly.
That's the only audience that's hearing.
Exactly right. So you should look for those implicit biases you have in your algorithm and analyze that. And then also a lot of times institutions are using algorithms to generate not necessarily need-based aid, but more the merit-based aid. And I would argue that you should probably do some type of human audit against those recommendations to make sure that what the computer, the algorithm spitting out makes sense with, what the algorithm would send out. Sorry, with what a human being would decide on, like a scholarship committee, et cetera.
The only thing I know about algorithms is that they feed me a lot of dog videos on my phone, and I love them. So the algorithms can be good. All right. Hopefully that answered your question. If you'd like more description on that, Mike can talk all day.
I really can.
I'll keep setting it up. Jess, do we have another question?
Yep. Before we get to a question, Christopher, it's not a question, but Christopher dropped us in the chat. When communicating either internally or externally, I think that this really holds true. The message should be, let's go there together. A student feels more comfortable and the instructor, staff person learns something that they may be able to use in the future. And I just thought that was a really, really good note. So thank you so much for sharing, Christopher. We had Patricia ask, this is a little bit more specific to her college. At College of Southern Maryland, we reach out to all new credit applications to see if they have questions and ask leading questions for the staff that they don't know how to ask. I guess that's not a question, but that's something awesome that she shared. Moving on to another question, Sarah, almost half of our incoming class every semester consists of transfer students from the community colleges in our metro area. As their enrollment drops, our transfer numbers do as well. What can we do to increase our yield when the pool is smaller? Our freshman numbers are great, but transfer numbers are lagging.
Well, the pool doesn't necessarily have to get bigger. A way to fix that is to be a little bit more refined and to be a little bit more successful in your yield. So maybe bringing in different students or bringing in transfers from an area that isn't traditionally represented would probably be a good way to do it. I would analyze the yield activities you have right now and figure out where those results are coming from, and then figure out, okay, the correlation we have with the community college issue over here, where does that overlap with our yield activities, and figure out, okay, well, can we supplement some of those things with other activities? So for example, when I hear local, I hear maybe there's not as much national or regional travel. I can't speculate for your school, but that might be something to consider, is maybe going into new markets and spending a few years there to build those relationships. I know that a VP of enrollment's not going to love seeing that budget be spent and you not recoup those students in year one, but building those relationships and creating that base helps. So maybe it's finding students in new markets. Maybe it is finding students from other area schools. So maybe not just the community college, but from area 4-year institutions or other 2-year institutions in your state as well.
Or online. COVID has opened up the door for online instruction, so much so that a lot of schools with this problem are turning to online instruction and attracting. You can attract a student from anywhere in that respect. So it was almost like the problem is going to be the competition is going to get fierce from that standpoint as well. And in 3 years, we'll be answering webinar questions about schools from other states stealing students from the pool that we have because of online instruction. So that is definitely something that is not going away. Is online studies and virtual studies from that standpoint. All right, Jess, do we have another question? I want to encourage people again to use the chat to ask questions, and someone apologized because it was specific to their school, but no, we want specific use cases and specific things about your school and in the conversation.
Yeah, so as we wait for a couple more questions to come in, we have some more discussion in the chat about video. So we have Lexi, who joined as a former videographer for a college within a large university. So, good background to have. Her guess is that a lot of university marketing teams are scared that branding will be off if other departments create video content. So when working with the university marketing team or communications team, maybe suggesting training for others to learn their branding requirements with video could be really, really useful. So a little more to add to that answer, how do we work around or with the marketing and communications team to create more video? Show that you know your stuff and that it's going to save everybody involved time and that you're sharing your expertise and you're getting where we need to be.
Really cross-departmental too. We talked about this on our last webinar conversation on FYI, and that was a tool like Canva, which can be a free tool, limited as a free tool, but certainly something that's accessible for any school to use. They have things like templates that can really help you make sure that everyone's staying on brand and using the same templates for different situations. And they're easy to find, they're easy to use. And I say this very honestly and not self-deprecating. I've used Canva. I am definitely not savvy. Anyone who's on this webinar who works with me is probably laughing right now. I'm not savvy. I can figure out Canva. You can figure out Canva. If I can do it, you can.
And, we've brought up this idea of how easy is it to find resources on your campus? This is a good opportunity for you to work with your Marcom teams on your website and say, brand guide, where do I find that? Like, where do I find the logo rules? Where do I find the Pantones and the hex codes, et cetera, so I know what I'm allowed to use? So using that as an example of these are resources that are really hard to find at our institution is probably a good way to breach that conversation.
And Amanda is 100% right. The videos you create do not have to be Oscar worthy. Just make sure they're shorter. If you're doing something like Mike suggested and highlighting a course, you just make sure the video gets to the point immediately. You don't have to put an entire 1.5-hour instruction online. Use the pause button, get important bullet points from there. So even if you don't post edit your videos, just make sure you're keeping the viewer of your video in mind when you're taping it. It's not just enough to just dump something and put it up there. Try and make it short, try and make it to the point. And again, just make sure that someone watching that video knows why they need to be watching it.
Should we talk retention?
Yeah, let's talk retention. Yeah.
Perfect.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, so we've alluded to this idea of belonging and Dr. Lisa Nunn. By the way, if anyone knows Dr. Nunn, we need to get her on a webinar.
Our people are efforting.
Yeah, she's brilliant. And she talks about the sense of belonging in 3 components. So the academic, the social, but then also the campus. So one of the things you should think about if you're an enrollment officer on this call and you have a role in retention is thinking about students and their experience in those 3 areas. And there are some ways in which those are going to mesh. There are some ways where they're totally different. So think about all the ways in which you're building up those experiences. And then to our point earlier when we were talking about resources and knowing the right questions, what are the barriers that would prevent people from truly experiencing the experience at our institution? How do they get involved? How do they learn about opportunities? If it's in our culture to do study abroad or to do trips or to do service opportunities, What are the costs involved with that? Are there ways for me to get grants if I don't necessarily have that money and can't necessarily take a job off campus? In fact, that might be part of it as well. Are these opportunities very convenient for commuter students versus resident students, or vice versa? So think about those sorts of things. Think about the leadership groups that you have in those experiences too. Would it be daunting to meet with a bunch of faculty in a research program? Maybe to some students. So having student leaders who sort of liaise between those two groups might be something to think about. And then when we think about the campus, you want to build your campus in such a way where you're incentivizing habits. So I'm going to bring up my alma mater, Canisius College, Go Griffs. We built a Tim Hortons on campus. For those who are not in the Northeast or Northern US, Tim Hortons is a big coffee shop here on the border of Canada, started in Ontario, I believe, right?
Yes, it did. It's named after a former Toronto Maple Leaf and Buffalo Sabre hockey
Yes.
player.
We're going down a tangent probably there. So my
It's okay.
apologies.
Color
But,
is good for a conversation.
yeah, so they put a Tim Hortons coffee shop literally in the library. And immediately overnight, the library became the place to be on campus. And instead of people studying in that building, people hang out in that building now. And where people used to hang out, people go to study because they've incentivized the behavior to go to the library. So be very intentional about your experiences there. In the past, we've talked about welcome centers. Think about, is there a building on campus? There's an office on campus where it's really easy for me to get information as a visitor, where to park, where do I go? Where do I get a campus map? Where do I get a parking pass? Those sorts of things are very important to the whole experience.
A parents page, you always mention.
Yes.
parents
Oh my
page.
gosh. Yeah,
Yes.
I can't get over that as well. And frankly, that
You have to
type of-
explain what I mean because someone might not know what I'm
That's
talking
true.
about.
So I believe every school should have a website like mongoose.edu/parent, where you highlight all the deadlines in the academic year, where you highlight all the requirements for a student, you highlight the cost of attendance, you highlight how a parent can get involved. There are, surprisingly, working with a number of institutions on the advancement side, there are a number of institutions that literally raise millions of dollars from their parents. So these people are already paying tuition and they want to donate more because they believe in your institution, they believe in your institution's mission. So explain to them the ways a parent can get involved in an appropriate way. So you still are, local apprentice, you still have control over that student experience, but you're allowing parents to feel involved and to get involved and frankly help the institution. Very, very important.
So whether you're trying to communicate with parents of prospective students or current students, or it's a first gen student that might not know the way, the important thing is that if your school has resources, make sure that students know where to find them or parents know how to find them in the case of what Mike's talking about. So make sure your resources are available. As a personal note, my wife is back in school. So she had to restart her life due to the pandemic. And it's so interesting to be here at Mongoose and to work with schools and understand that what our clients are going through and what the students of our clients are going through, and then to have it come into your own home. And resources is a big thing. My wife didn't have any problem with the process of getting into school, it being her second time. She just navigated that smoothly. What she did not know about was things like tuition resources and scholarships. And her school did a great job. It's NCCC in Niagara County in New York. I'll give them a shout out. I don't know if they're on the webinar, but they did a great job of making her aware of those resources and guiding her through that. And that little touch can go such a long way with the student. Just even if they aren't sure, if they're eligible for those kinds of resources, just letting them know about it goes a long way.
Yeah, I would say one of the best parts of working at Mongoose is working with institutions and hearing them talk about that one conversation they had with a student where they were able to get them a grant or able to get them, a waiver for a class or for a lab fee, et cetera. And it kept that student there, and then that student graduated, and it all snowballs from there. It's really rewarding.
Yeah, we had a community college that, and we were lucky enough to have a conversation with the school during a busy time for them. And they have this great story about a student on campus that reached out. They reached out to this student just as a checkup, just at a certain point in time. We know this is a busy time of year. How are you doing in, securing your enrollment in our school? And the student was just overjoyed. They did not know that they were still eligible because it was close to a deadline. And a student doesn't necessarily hold the deadlines in their head as well as you do. They might know around the time they were supposed to get this done, but they might not know it exactly. So in the student's mind, that deadline has passed. They were no longer thinking about school. They were looking for employment. at that time to start their winter. That student was overjoyed by the text and said, oh my goodness, I didn't know I was still eligible. Within 4 texts, they had them secured in their financial aid, secured in their application, and now they see that student on campus, and that, you know, that's a great feeling for them. So that's a secondhand story that we get to experience, but it really does start with just a simple reach out at the appropriate time, you know, just to, you know, just communicate with students and make sure that they know that you're available to answer their questions.
I believe that school's on the webinar today, actually.
Oh, look at
Yeah,
that. Yeah,
yeah.
that's weird. I wonder if he knows that it just
We're
telling his
talking about
story. Yeah,
him.
that's right. Yeah.
Ears are burning in Syracuse.
Yes, we might have a new question, Jess, do we?
I don't think it's a question, but Luann chimed in with, she's with Allegheny College of Maryland.
Yeah,
And she has a dual role as a CTE recruiter and retention specialist. All career education students know that she's there to connect them with any type of resources that they need, either community or college. Program directors and instructors send students her way, or they can come and meet her on their own. Not a question, but hats off to you, Luann, for being the resource that so many students and so many staff members lean on. That's a really important role to fill.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you for that. I love that. It doesn't always have to be questions. If you have just something that's working at your school or some other way that you're going above and beyond to help students, we'd love to hear about it. So
we did have a question. We did have a question come in from Andy. Many recruiters are concerned about their info sessions having accurate ADA subtitles. We love accessibility. How does user created video fall in line with best practices of serving those needing or wanting subtitles? Just as PDFs are frowned upon because of their failing ADA preferences and guidelines, is this something that we should be concerned about?
Well, depending on where a video is posted, many times subtitles can be auto-generated, which makes the process easier, and it's a time resource save for you. For instance, if you're making a social video, something on your website, I don't think that that's as easy to generate. So do you have anything on this, Mike, as I think about it?
There are services out there that will do it, and they're fairly inexpensive. I know historically we've at Mongoose even considered doing that on training videos.
Yes, we have. Yeah. And our hour, like if we put an hour-long webinar up, that's a lot of typing. So we looked into doing that. So there's fairly inexpensive ones where you can get an hour-long video with subtitles generated that are like 99% accurate for maybe like if you subscribe to them, if you're doing a lot of videos, you can get it for like $30 a video. And that's a resource if you want to reach out to me. After the webinar, I can tell you, you know, what I was talking about when I was talking about that. But so I would say with subtitles, it's kind of like we talked about with video generation. So important that the important points of the video are very clear. But if you're subtitling a long video and it's not completely perfect, as long as the point is there, I think people will be happy with that. So I don't know if that answers the question specifically.
And Lexi added some color to that. Thank you, Lexi, about SRT files as well on YouTube. So Andy, take a look at that. Feel free to email us because we'll send you those resources. Absolutely.
Yeah, there was a question last webinar. And if you weren't here for this conversation, someone had a question about competing schools advertising. So they'd have a video on YouTube, and before their video started saying all these great things about their school, another school's commercial would be the ad that played before their school. They asked, how do we stop that? We were completely stumped, but because we are not here for the short haul, we're here for the long haul. Mike did the research and it wasn't hard to find. We just didn't know it off the top of our head. And we reached back out to this person and said, yes, you can control who does ads on your page. Why don't you just say it since I brought it up?
Yeah, there's an ad blocker tool in YouTube that you can use to block competitors based on a URL. So that's what we recommend the institution do. We sent them a link and everything.
Awesome. So there you go. So that's a callback to our last FYI. Jess, do we have another one?
Yep. So we had a question from Jennifer. Do we have any good research on graduate recruitment? We've talked a lot about parents. We've talked a lot about, you know, traditional students, first generation students, and a lot of the information that we've provided is relevant, but is there any targeted information that we can share on graduate recruitment?
I'll start with just a small thing with any kind of recruitment, and that is showing a return on investment. So that has to be a problem for grad schools. It's showing that time and that money that's invested in that, you know, that will be worth it. So if you can have alumni speak to any prospective student that you might have for your grad school. That goes a long way to showing that it is indeed worth it, because people are really questioning before they make those decisions, whether or not those decisions are worth it. And any way you can show that that decision is worth it is a good thing.
Yeah, admittedly, we should probably do more content in graduate. There's probably more that we could generate. Jennifer, I'm going to reach out to you individually. I want to find out what institution you're with, because there's lots of things that we could do to enhance, or things I could recommend for enhancing graduate recruitment. But I kind of want to hear if you have a very decentralized model, which I would imagine you do for graduate recruitment, or kind of like what's the lay of the land at your institution. We can provide better advice from there.
All right, cool. We don't have a ton of time left. We might have time for another question or two. I hope everyone's enjoying our conversation, and I super appreciate everyone who's added to it to this point.
Yes.
So thank you for that. And again, if you were late joining us and you missed the beginning of it, you will receive a recording of this conversation, unless you're watching the recording right now, which is strange. Jess, we have time for another question or two, but the question is, do we have another question or two?
Oh, we do. And Mike, you're going to love it. It's a question coming in from Toledo.
Best capital of the world.
Wow, big game against
Yes.
UB tonight, I believe.
I believe that's true. The Rockets.
All right, so Matthew works with U Toledo's College Credit Plus program. This program allows current high school students to participate in college courses. I'm building out a recruitment plan. We are trying to come up with strategies to yield students and increase interest. What strategies would you recommend to increase our inquiry pool? It can be difficult as we're working with 7th to 12th graders. I would like to see an increase in interested students and also retain those students to encourage them to continue in the program. I don't seem to be getting too many responses through texting.
So
7th grade is far back to reach.
that's pretty far back. There's also potentially NCAA implications as well. So I want to be careful with my advice there, because we don't want you to get it, especially when you're playing the UB Bulls tonight. We don't want there to be any NCAA infractions occurring. This could be a really good year for the Rockets in basketball. But getting back to your question, I would say that I would work with the parents of those students that are in your pre-collegiate programs, and I would find out what led those parents to enroll them in those programs at UT versus another high school in the area. Was it supplemental? Maybe the high school didn't offer this particular course. They went above and beyond in science or the humanities, et cetera, above their high school curriculum. And so they reached out to Toledo to do a little bit more. But I would find out those reasons. And then from there, you can kind of work backwards and say, okay, well, these are marketing messages we can build out. So perhaps it is talking about staying local and the convenience. Perhaps it is getting a leg up in certain key programs. So at the University of Toledo, fantastic law school. So it might be getting ahead of those students and saying, hey, go pre-law here and then come here for law school, stay local, save a ton of money. So it all depends on the rationale for people getting involved in those programs. And then from there, we can work backwards to assemble a really good marketing message.
Cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the more you know, the better it is to, fine tune that.
Mm-hmm.
We have one final question if we want to get into it. 2 quick things. Amanda also, she shared in the chat that Instagram has just announced auto-generated captions to videos in the feed. So that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Amanda. Great resource for everybody. And Kim has a Toledo area CCP student. And so Matt and Kim, you guys connect. Guys, this is a community of people trying to make higher ed better and make education more accessible, sharing knowledge. So we're all on LinkedIn. You can connect with us on LinkedIn, connect with each other on LinkedIn. We love to see this community building. Last question. Yep, we have more questions coming in about graduate recruitment. So maybe we need to create some more content on graduate recruitment.
Another FYI coming up.
Yep. Maybe that's going to be coming up quicker. So Mark had a question on recruiting adult learners for a second bachelor's degree.
Good. So same thing. When people think about their website, a lot of times we think about the traditional college age student, 17 to maybe 24. But making sure you're sprinkling in those that content there, so people know that, hey, if you are a quote unquote post-traditional student or non-traditional student, whatever language you prefer, your institution, that you're welcome here, and what those resources are. To Greg's point about his wife and her going through the collegiate experience again, making sure that they have plenty of resources and understanding where I go and how I get this done, and how do I pay for all this. And one of the things that's interesting about adult learners, and again, we're generalizing here, everybody's different, but the outcomes are going to be much more impactful for them and much more immediate to them. So when we talk about outcomes, usually when we mention traditional students, a lot of times you'll hear me mention parents. In this case, we want to get this right in front of our prospective students. So maybe those post-traditional students move to the front of the line in terms of meeting with faculty. So they really understand that, hey, this is the benefit of this program. These are the internships available to me. This is what I'll be doing the second I get my degree done. Mm-hmm. So getting them in front of those resources, I think, is very important.
Yeah, and I think instructors speaking to adult learners is super important as well. So they can understand, their audience. That may have been the last question, although I'm seeing some things pop up at the end here.
Oh, that's the last question. Just chat, people having a conversation.
I love it. Thank you so much for adding some things. It looks like we have a grad FYI coming up pretty quickly. We'll see how that goes. So thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thanks to Jess Stonish, who just does an amazing job holding forum, admitting people, making sure everything is in line. Mike, you did a great job today.
Thank you.
4 out of 5.
That's what I aim for.
All right. Thank you everyone for joining us on FYI. Make sure that you're checking out future presentations that we have. We do this every other week, and the topic is always going to be different. So hopefully it's something that interests you. If there is a particular topic you want covered, don't be afraid to reach out to us. Greg at mongooseresearch.com, GREG, Mike at mongooseresearch.com, MIKE, and you can check out our website, which is in the chat as well, to find out a little bit more about us. We love answering questions, so our office never closes in that respect. So thanks to everyone for joining us, and I hope you have a great day. Mike, any closing words?
U of Toledo will fight for you. Go Rockets.
Oh, wow.
Thank you so much.
Wow, he's like this constantly.
All the time.
Thanks everyone. Enjoy your day.